Hey there, guys, gals, and those in between. We're back after a pretty long absence, but if you see the size of the video, you can probably guess why. So yes, we are going over Silent Hill 2, the complete history of the remake and the series itself. That means every game from The Room to the remake itself. We're also going to cover Kojima's less than stellar departure, the overall malaise that covered the series as a whole from the PS3 onwards, and finally once more the remake itself. So sit back, relax, grab a frosty beverage as we explore the complete history of the Silent Hill 2 remake.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life.
So before we start, I am going to be spoiling a lot of games, so let's get that out of the way. Also, yeah, the 2 remake is good, so that's not up for discussion. And seeing as I already did a video on the original part 2, we won't talk much about it. Silent Hill 2 is considered one of the greatest games of all time, due in part to its ethereal, dreamlike state, a depressive atmosphere that permeates every minute that you play, along with characters that seem out of touch, monsters that play into fears, and also its tackling of more adult issues including SA, taking one's own life, euthanasia, and more. For being 20 years old, it still stands the test of time, so I'd more like to talk about how there seemed to be a general funk around Silent Hill past the PS2 era. So much that many actually wrote off the 2 remake before it even got released. There were so many videos of people saying that it would just be horrible. And now it's the inverse. People are saying it saved Silent Hill. In regards to saving Silent Hill, I'm gonna drop a hot take. A nuclear take. A take so massively fiery it'll go down in history as terrible as the Sonic was never good take. A take that might nuke my Z-list YouTube status. So for all suspense and purposes, here it is. Silent Hill was never bad and thus never really needed saving. Yeah, during my time playing all these games, I'm having a hard time believing the Silent Hill series was ever in a sorry state. So much I'm kind of shocked over the common sentiment that there was no good games post part 3. Some people even go as far as saying there was nothing good post part 2. And don't get me wrong, there is some absolute stinkers like Ascension, which we will get to. But yeah, a lot of the games I played, I found myself either really enjoying them or I was thinking they were just kinda bad. But when you ask people who believe that Silent Hill was bad for 20 years, a lot of times you'll hear conflicting statements. And I think the best example of this is the next entry in the series after part 3, Silent Hill 4: The Room. The Room was made during the same time as part 3, and something I've heard a lot is that, well, it's not a real Silent Hill game. And this is patently false. I think the reason why this rumor got so big is because, well, one, the internet, and also because of mistranslations. I found a Eurogamer interview where they talked to Akira Yamaoka and Masashi Tsuboyama, who was the director of Part 2 and the art director of Part 4. Eurogamer asked the pair, Silent Hill's action sequences have traditionally been more puzzle, narrative, and atmosphere based, where number 4 has largely shied away from giving the player much in the way of riddles to solve, replacing it instead with an onslaught of sometimes invincible enemies. By the end of the game, we've killed nearly 500 enemies, which to us seemed excessive and made the game much more about slaying slimy, otherworldly mutants than becoming immersed in a rich, sinister atmosphere. Did they go too far into the realms of being an action game, we asked? Yamaoka replied back, if we hear that kind of comment, we take it as a positive. What an absolute Chad. The interviewer was basically like, I'm not really a big fan of this game. Thanks, that's what we were going for. Jokes aside, the interviewer even states that Yamaoka missed the point of their question, and later when asked about the game starting as Room 302, Tsuboyama stated yes, that's correct. So people ran with the false narrative that Room 302 was just some random story that Konami thought wouldn't sell well, so they just shoehorned Silent Hill into the name. This makes zero sense since Team Silent were the ones who made it. And in another interview, Tsuboyama and Yamaoka better elucidate their point, stating that Room 302 always started as a game that took place within the Silent Hill series, with it being designed as a spin-off early on, before it then being turned into a mainline game. Tsubayama states that their room was always connected to Silent Hill, as they only got the idea of the room because Silent Hill exists, and that without Silent Hill, there would be no room, so that they were always connected from the start. This is kind of funny because a common criticism of the Silent Hill series in this era was that if only Konami had let Team Silent continue to make games, and then they make workarounds for not liking the room. Look, if you don't like Silent Hill 4 The Room, you don't like a game Team Silent made. If you think it's a bad game, you think Team Silent made a bad game. It's really that simple. I don't feel that way. I think The Room has its issues, but overall, I think it's a pretty good game which has a killer concept. The plot of The Room is that one day Harry Townsend wakes up to find he's been locked in his apartment. But the odd thing is, he's been locked from the inside. Someone found a way to bolt the inside of his room with him unaware. The windows are sealed and no one can seem to hear him if he tries begging for help. This was intentional, as the team has stated the point of the room would be to take a place the player would consider safe, their home, and turn it on their head. And I could not agree more of how great of a design choice this is. I feel like we've all had nightmares in our life, and as we get older, those nightmares don't hit the same way. Sure, you watch a scary movie before bed, the xenomorph catches you in your dream, but you just go back to bed because you're aware it's just a dream. That's been my experience, except for one time 10 years ago. I had a nightmare similar to The Room that I can still recall. Maybe it was a mix of stress, poor diet, lack of exercise, school, bad sleep, who knows? But I dreamed someone broke into my home and started to just attack, hurt, and murder my entire family. I was unable to move as I heard my family scream in horror, even my pets, and my nephew who was 2 years old at the time. I woke up with my heart beating out of my chest. I grabbed the jug of water I keep and just drank for 5 minutes. I was drenched in sweat in the middle of winter. I had to check if my pets were still alive just to confirm that it was just a dream. That's how bad it was, because it involved someone tarnishing something sacred. There's really something profane about your home being invaded. And Team Silent understood that. So for the first time in Silent Hill history, this wasn't someone connected to the town. He didn't live in Silent Hill, but rather in a town called Ashfield, which was 100 miles away. I do like how even back then it seemed Konami was trying to not have Silent Hill be contained in just Silent Hill. So thus, Henry was just living his life when one day Silent Hill locked him in his home, and after a few days he found a wall in his bedroom. He then goes through these holes to connect to the outside world in the hopes of escaping, but they only just lead back to his room. Now, your room acts like a hub for you to go into these new locations. Another change of pace is the majority of the game takes place in the other world. I'd even go so far as to say you're never actually in the real world and you're always stuck in this nightmare. The unique thing about this game is that when you're in your room, it's a first-person perspective, because the team wanted to do something new. When you enter any holes, the game turns into a more traditional Silent Hill game as you explore these areas in the hopes of fleeing from your imprisonment. With great monsters and also a really great atmosphere, I like how even in the worlds you visit, where you can even see that there's something outside, all these levels feel constrained and claustrophobic. So even when you're outside, you've never really escaped from your room. My favorite is when you start seeing things that just cannot exist, like these holes that are connected to literally nothing, but you can still crawl into them. It's clear this game has all the shades of Silent Hill, along with a great soundtrack by Akira Yamaoka. Though for all its highlights, this game does have its flaws. Firstly, it's very unfriendly to new players. If you know what you're doing, you can easily beat the game, but first-time players will be caught off guard. Secondly, you now have a limited inventory system where you can only carry a handful of items and you can't drop any items. So you're going to have to go ahead and go to your room or waste items if you don't want to make the trek back to the trunk in your apartment. This could have been done better. I get what they're going for. They didn't want players to have 200 bullets for every gun, but now each individual ammo takes up space. So one space for 10 ammo, another space for 10 ammo, etc. They could have easily limited it so that maybe one slot takes up 3 combined ammo at most, Or the same with health items. Because yeah, I found myself more than once having to backtrack just to deposit ammo or health. The game also is once more focused on more action, which is a move some didn't enjoy. Even back then, publications were saying that Silent Hill really always struggled with combat, and yeah, you can avoid the enemies, but you can't avoid every enemy, and the combat in the room can be best described as adequate. It's not amazing, it's still a bit clunky, but it never felt troublesome. The game tried to innovate by having a charge meter for more powerful attacks. The only issue is balance. So long as you get the axe, you just win the game. Its charge attack makes it so Henry swings in a pretty large arc, but also while it's swinging, Henry has invincibility frames. So if you don't like the combat and more want puzzles like the Eurogamer guy did, you're going to be disappointed that most are just fetch quests. There are a few puzzles that actually make use of the unique setup requiring you to go back to your room and using what you can see outside your window in order to progress. I feel like they should have done more with that, and it would have made the game more unique and balanced out that need for puzzles. Because there's some times where you have to look outside to find the phone number. They really should have played more into that. The game also does the cardinal sin of where the last third of the game is just backtracking through the entire game again. All the while, it's also become an escort mission with your neighbor Eileen. Your neighbor who the game doesn't tell you, but if you don't take care of her, it will lock you into the bad ending. And also now you have invincible enemies. And because Eileen is injured, you're going to have to fight because if you go too far, you'll leave her behind. And if you leave her behind in a room of enemies, that makes it easier to get locked into that bad ending. And it doesn't help that you can't incapacitate every enemy. You know how earlier I said the game can be unfair to newer players? The ghosts are a clear example. So at the start, you encounter ghosts and you can't kill them. I mean, they are ghosts. Where would you send them? In afterlife? Super hell? Ultra heaven? World -1? So yeah, you can't beat the ghosts, but thankfully the ghosts for the most part are really slow and easily avoidable. The only way to actually stop the ghosts is to either use items like candles and medallions to protect yourself, or knock them down and then use the swords of obedience, of which there are only 5 in the entire game. So about those candles and medallions, in the last third of the game, your home becomes possessed. The only way to clear it is to use those items I mentioned. But if you use them all, you better not miss any more, because if you don't clear the possessions, you can also get locked into a bad ending. But I don't really hate the fact that the game basically punishes you, because again, the ghosts you encounter in the first 2/3 of the game move so slow, they're not a threat. So there's no reason for you to actually use a candle or a medallion on those sets. Similar to how once more when you reach the final act, returning to your room no longer restores your health. I feel this is a decent way to punish impatient players who instead of saving health items by going to the game hub, just use them instead. The swords I mentioned though, yeah, that's cheap. So in the first 2/3 of the game, every time you enter a new world, you will meet a new character who ends in a grisly fate. In that final act, these people come back as ghosts and they are much tougher, they move much faster, have special attacks, hit harder, and have abilities like teleportation. Now I actually really enjoyed the fact that these ghosts are worse because they're people you failed to save. The other ghosts are victims, but you had no real connection to them. They're just people that you're aware existed. While here, they're angry you failed to save them, and you're also upset you couldn't save them. All the side characters are pretty memorable, which helps because Henry is the most silent, pun intended, of all protagonists. And this was an implicit choice by Team Silent, saying they wanted players to project onto Henry and rather have the world and characters react to him. Though I would prefer if he had a bit more emotion, truth be told. There's no issue having kind of a strong silent type, but he should react a bit more, especially when these ghosts that chase him come back to life. So with those 4 ghosts, you're going to want to use those swords of obedience, but 2 are permanently missable. Oh, and also these ghosts can chase you to other worlds. So once more, if you know where the swords are and what to do, it's easy. If not, it can be really bothersome and punish new players. With all that said, the room still stands on its own, with its unique use of the otherworld, the first-person room interactions, a great setup, amazing ambiance, and a great antagonist in the villain Walter Sullivan. And most reviewers agreed, with the game receiving high reviews, and it won many publications' Best Survival Horror Game of the Year award. Funny enough, one reviewer said he liked the game, but he was worried we got this game merely 1 year after Part 3, and was kind of hesitant about receiving yearly Silent Hill games. Man, imagine complaining about that in today's day and age, especially after the drought we will talk about. If only that was the case, but he did get his wish, as it took 3 years before we got Silent Hill Origins.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life.
Origins, or Silent Hill 0, as it's known in Japan, was originally intended to be a remake of the first game before morphing, I literally almost said morbing, into its own thing. And remarkably, a lot of Silent Hill games made during this time was actually because of the movie. Yeah, it seems strange in retrospect, but the first Silent Hill movie made back double its budget in theaters and was okay enough to have Konami start pumping out content. Honestly, the movie's okay at best. I feel it's not bad enough to be memorable like, say, Street Fighter, but it also came out before we had good adaptations like the Sonic films. It ultimately feels like the Uncharted movie in that it was just okay, of which I'm one of like 10 people that saw the Uncharted movie in theaters. I wouldn't go out of my way to watch it, but hey, if it gave us more Silent Hill stuff, who am I to complain? So Origins has 2 original credits to its name. Firstly, it was the first game not to be made by Team Silent minus Akira Yamaoka, who was doing the music. And secondly, it was a handheld title for the PSP. For the sake of clarity, I recorded this on my PSTV. When it was announced, it was met with apprehension. The idea that Konami would let a Western developer go ahead and make Silent Hill was seen as blasphemy. Even though Silent Hill was actually a property that always did better in the West than in its native Japan. It was actually seen as something of a one-off when The Room debuted at number 1 in its native Japan, before falling back down to number 10 the very next week. Industry analysts noted that Konami was actually pleasantly pleased with home sales in Japan, but that they were more focused on its American and European prospects, so it actually made a ton of sense to let a Western developer go ahead and make the game. Especially because Team Silent was never a true in-house studio, but rather a ragtag collection of people, with only a few people like Yamaoka and Masahiro Ito, the monster designer, being 2 of the few who worked on every game. While Climax had been in the business for many years since the late 80s, they never really worked on a horror title, so I can understand people's apprehension towards giving someone else the keys to the car, because hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which, fair. And the original demo that was released didn't help matters. It seemed more like a proof of concept than anything else, and the first Origins trailer felt very much like it was chasing the trend of Resident Evil 4, as opposed to being Silent Hill. So it received a very negative reaction online. It also didn't help that the game shifted from Climax Studios LA to their UK offices. Sam Barlow, who was the lead designer and the writer, has stated that originally the game was much different than the final product. That when they had received it in the UK, it was actually supposed to be more akin to a dark comedy based on Scrubs. And hey, maybe it's just me, but that sounds awful. Thankfully, that is not the product we got, and Climax UK honestly took a lot of care into making the game and understanding the limitations of the PSP with it being a handheld horror title. Even Akira Yamaoka, I know I mentioned him a lot, but he's like one of 3 people involved in the majority of Silent Hill games. He himself mentioned that making horror for the small screen does bring its own challenges in working with that much smaller space. And Climax was aware of that, knowing not everyone would have optimal sunlight or sound if they're in a public setting. So while you still have radio noise to alert monsters to you, the screen itself actually does a really cool film degradation effect to better assist players. And also, Travis can kind of do this gesture where his head will look at any item. I personally never noticed this, but hey, maybe it helps some people. And once actual demos were released and it showed that the game had changed from its original trailer, most reviewers were actually pretty happy with what they played, and a lot of that skepticism was washed away. It also helped that that whole dark comedy Scrubs angle was completely dissolved. The team's goal for this game was for Origins to be a perfect melding of parts 1 and 2, to have the cult storyline of part 1 while also retaining the personal and emotional journey of the second game. And honestly, they knocked it out of the park. If you think that there are no good Silent Hill games after part 3 and you haven't played Origins, you are doing yourself a massive disservice. Because I feel like this small screen journey could have easily been a mainline game with some tweaking and some extensions. This game has one of my favorite introductions. Actually, this game has a lot of my favorites. It stars Travis Grady, a trucker who's just trying to escape his past when his engine died and he's summoned to Silent Hill. Seeing a building on fire, he rescues a burned girl, Alessa Gillespie, who plays a prominent role in the lore. And thus, it starts his journey as he has to confront his own trauma. Origins is more action heavy, more so than The Room. Here you get a bunch of weapons, like a ton, more than any other game, because here weapons actually break after use, so you'll be constantly switching. Only issue is there's no indication that a weapon will break until it does, and when that happens, Travis can only throw his fisticuffs until you open the menu and switch. But I do like him being able to throw a punch shows he's more physical than your average Silent Hill protagonist. The main gimmick of this game is that you can actually freely travel between the real world and the other world via the use of mirrors. Some people hated this, but I thought it made sense considering Travis's story. Essentially, when Travis was young, his mother was convinced that beings from the mirror were telling her son was a devil child, and thus she tried to kill her own son. So this ability to travel via mirrors makes sense because Silent Hill is a place where thoughts become real. You'll also now have 2 sets of maps that you have to look through, and that can be annoying. But Origins sticks pretty well with the 2-world design, making it so traveling between back and forth is needed to progress through the game, and you will want to continue the game because I think Climax really nailed that fusion they were going for. You see more of the nurse Lisa Garland and her attraction towards Travis. It really proves that old adage that broken people seek broken people. That might be the reason why Travis was called by Alessa, as you see her spirit various times throughout the game. We know that she was someone who was abused by her overly religious mother, so she called another child of abuse in the hopes that he could save both of them. And that all ties into that Travis still has these issues he hasn't fully dealt with. After all the monsters and the bosses represent his subconscious. The second boss being that of his mother who tried to kill him when he was younger. And she's not the only family member you fight. So Travis's mom's mental state also affected his dad. When he was younger, they both visited her in the hospital, and his father realized that his wife was truly well and gone. So at a motel while Travis was playing pinball, his father went and took his own life, hanging himself. Travis could not contend with what he just saw. He was just a child, so he just stood there all night while his father's body just hung there. A worker from the motel found him and even notes how it messed him up. So one can only imagine the toll it took on Travis. When you find the monster that represents your father, who is one of the best boss fights in the series, he even tells you, "You knew I wasn't sleeping, son." That Travis knew his father was dead but couldn't admit it. The boss also has a rather apt and devastating name simply called the Sad Daddy. Travis does destroy this specter that's been haunting him for years, stops the cult, sees Alyssa split her soul into 2 as the events of Silent Hill 1 start. And as for Travis, he turns his odometer to 0, signifying his demons are done and he's starting a fresh life. Yeah, this game is really good. Honestly, I liked it more than The Room, and I was a decent fan of The Room. And many reviewers enjoyed it, really only finding faults with the camera. It's one of those click to center cameras, but camera issues in the PSP were pretty common. And also the QuickTime events. Personally, I never liked QTEs. And in this game, near the end, I just found it more bothersome than anything. I know the intent of QTEs is to keep the player engaged, but I don't like them. And while I enjoy the abundance of weapons, it seems some weapons were stronger than others, but the game really gives you no indication if that's the case. I could just be tricking myself. It could just be my mind making things up, which, is kind of perfect for a psychological horror game. Those are really the only flaws. The one version that got bad reviews was the PS2 version. That's because Konami just shoved it to the PS2 with minimal blink and you miss it graphic updates. Honestly, if you didn't like The Room, I feel like Origins might be best. It has a pretty decent combat with the 1.5 million weapons you get, and some great puzzles. My favorite is in the hotel where you need a day, month, and year, and the game never explicitly tells you, but trusts you to piece together various pieces of information in order to solve it. There's only a few monster designs, but it's a mobile title, so it works in that it can be beaten around 10 hours, and Travis feels underappreciated as a protagonist. My favorite aspect of him is that he has the potential to be a serial killer. So in the motel, which is the last area of the game, you'll find pictures of women all killed in horrific ways. And you also encounter Timu Pyramid Head called the Butcher, who's tied to Travis. It shows that if he doesn't work through his issues, he has the capacity to become a monster. The bad end even hints at this with him killing women, with some of them saying, "I'm not your mom." So I don't think Travis is a serial killer, but if he doesn't work through his issues, the trauma, of his father taking his own life and his mother trying to kill him. But I feel that because he's worked through that, that's simply a what if and not what he is. It's clear Climax knew what they were doing, there were high expectations, and they smashed through the ceiling. Honestly, this downfall of Silent Hill that I was doing for this video started to seem like anything but. But then Homecoming kind of derailed some of that momentum.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life.
So even though Climax did a stellar job of Origins, they were not assigned to do the next mainline title. They were instead set to work on Shattered Memories, which we'll get to after. Instead, the job of Silent Hill 5 Homecoming was sourced to Double Helix Productions, formed from a merger of Shiny Entertainment and The Collective. Shiny being every 90 kid's favorite in that they helped develop the Earthworm Jim games. The Collective, meanwhile, tended to do a lot of licensed stuff like Star Wars and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, with many receiving either low to middling critical reviews. Their most famous game actually being Mark Echo's Getting Up. This had people worried because neither team had really worked on any horror games before, but hey, neither did Climax, and that worked out great. Spoilers, this did not work out great. The team seemed to understand that what they were embarking on was a pretty big undertaking. Jason Allen, the lead designer, had talked about the challenges of making the game, stating that the development of Silent Hill is that it's a Japanese developer telling a Western horror story, but from a Japanese perspective. He even notes that may indeed be Silent Hill's strength, that it's an outsider's perspective on small-town Americana. That Silent Hill is a place that resembles any small town, but with no distinctions, and thus leads to that unsettling and strange feeling many have about this town that could be anywhere, and yet is nowhere. It also bears mentioning that even though Konami had given Western Studios control over the series, they were still the ones okaying everything. The buck stops somewhere, and in this case, the buck stops at Konami. Patrick J. Doody, who co-wrote the game in an interview, stated how he was a huge fan of the series, and that in the writing process, everything was sent for Konami to approve to ensure it didn't conflict with any established lore or characters. So, similar to me talking about the third birthday, hate or dislike Homecoming, Konami were the ones who approved it. Homecoming is also the first game to not be released in Japan. This led to speculation that the game was so terrible that Konami just didn't want to release it in his home country. This is false. Do you really think Japan doesn't get terrible games? Because I can assure you, they do. No, Japanese blog Gigazine actually contacted Konami about its Japanese cancellation, and they were told straight up, "We just didn't think it would sell too well in Japan." When they asked about the gore in the game, the Konami representative once more reiterated they just didn't think there would be enough of an audience in Japan for this game. And I can see why. Once more, Silent Hill has always been a more Western property, and now you're playing as a soldier returning from home after a war as you look for your brother. Also, once more, you're not in Silent Hill at all, but rather a neighboring town, because Konami really was trying to get away from the trappings of Silent Hill. but it didn't quite work out. Now, the initial idea for Homecoming sounded really interesting. The concept was initially that they removed the darkness, as it was proposed to be a game that toyed with the idea of fears during the daylight, which would be a gargantuan task. It's not impossible, but color tones play a large part in the ambiance of how a game plays and feels. This whole notion was why it was speculated that Homecoming would actually be called Silent Hill Shadows, which was never the official name. It's just something the internet ran with. Homecoming didn't do that. It still primarily takes place in the fog, and ironically, this is probably the darkest game in Silent Hill's history. And I don't mean by tone, more so, holy crap, this game is dark and hard to see, and your flashlight doesn't help much. But that kind of helps because the actual colors worked really well. For the PS3, this generation of gaming is infamous for having a lot of gray, dark blue, yellow. Some have even mocked games of this era, saying that they used a piss filter for how disgustingly bad some of these games looked. And yeah, there's a lot of gray that Homecoming uses, but once more, it actually works to the benefit of the game as you go through a story, which is where most people feel that the game actually failed at. As stated before, you now play as a soldier returning from war named Alex Shepard, who comes home and is given a lift by underrated protag Travis Grady. Once home and he starts seeing all these monsters, he starts looking for his brother. Unlike Travis, I'm not the biggest fan of Alex, which is a shame. This game has a lot of good ideas, but I feel it's just poorly executed. If you like puzzles, this game has a scant few, as once more Konami was trying to find the right balance, but for many it leaned too much towards action. I don't really agree nor disagree. Alex is a soldier, so it makes sense there would be more combat, and many of the game levels are in more confined areas to really push towards said gameplay. The issue is, yeah, Silent Hill still hadn't quite mastered combat as of yet. You get 3 or so different weapons which you can upgrade. You can dodge with a dedicated dodge button, but it doesn't always work. Even counter enemy attacks, all that good stuff, but honestly, those slower weapons will just make it so enemies can kill you faster. Your best bet is just using the knife 90% of the time. It will decimate most enemies. There was only a few enemies that I could count on less than one hand where you have to use a different weapon and do some sort of setup in order to hurt them, like the Needlers. Another major complaint of the game is that it relies very much on Part 2. The team even said Part 2 was an inspiration, and that's the second time that Konami has decided to do that. Which, don't get me wrong, I love Part 2, but there are other games in the series they can take inspiration from and improve on, in my opinion. Homecoming for many doesn't seem to take inspiration from as much as hastily copied the homework from your classmates 5 minutes before the bell rings. So Homecoming's big twist is that your brother that you've been looking for isn't alive. That one day when hanging out, Alex accidentally killed his brother and was sent to a mental hospital. He was never really a soldier. This didn't sit well with fans, as it made them all think, oh, like James actually killed his wife this whole time. These allegations of lazy copy-pasting weren't helped by the fact that they decided to go ahead and bring in Pyramid Head, a decision that Tom Hewlett actually tried to argue against. He had stated that Pyramid Head was essential to James's story, as every monster is representative of each individual protagonist, and the team should instead opt for something more creative. Tom Hewlett was then told to shut his whore mouth, and they went and added Pyramid Head, a decision no one likes. And yeah, I played the game and he's only there for 2 scenes. I legitimately forgot he existed until he came at the end to kill your abusive father. This is a shame because Homecoming does some things really well. It has some of the best foreshadowing in the series as a whole. So Alex's main combo where he twirls his knife is a great way to show that, yeah, he was never in the army, and it makes perfect sense because he has no real combat experience. So he's fighting in a way he would imagine an action hero or a video game character would fight. It's overdone with dramatic flares because it looks good. It's a child's idea of what would be effective. It looks cool, therefore it's the best. And by doing those flourishes and exposing his back, it's a great way to hint to the player that not everything is as it seems. I love how at the start it even hints at the final boss. At the start you find a picture of a toy soldier about to do a battle with a spider, and that is the final boss, your brother now a witch spider thing. Those are my highlights, but everything else is pretty mixed. The story has always been a central part of Silent Hill, and this one just doesn't commit. The main crux is that the town you live in left the cult of Silent Hill, and the price they have to pay to leave is that every 50 years, the 4 founding families kill one of their children. One by suffocation, one by being buried alive, one by being dismembered, and the last one via drowning. Alex was supposed to be the drowning sacrifice, but the death of his brother, the covenant was broken, and thus we get all this madness. All the families had different ways of dealing with said sacrifice. One opted to spoil his kid rotten, make sure he wanted for nothing before he had to bury him alive. Another one was just mentally broken by doing it. A third was like, screw this, I love the cult, take my kid, can I give you another? And Alex's family had the most interesting approach. They decided to simply not love Alex in the hopes that by sacrificing him, they would be sacrificing a stranger. His dad even tells them they treated the dog better. All they did was Alex is feed him, clothe him, and made sure he had a roof over his head. That's all. This is a great avenue to explore, that of emotional abuse, of scars that can be made not via anything physical, but rather by neglecting someone emotionally. And the game does nothing with this A+ point. The game also commits a cardinal sin in Silent Hill by just telling us way too much. So Silent Hill fans are kind of like Dark Souls fans. We love not being told things and just figuring out connections or hints on our own. It's been that way since the first game. Homecoming decides to just tell us way too much. So when Alex gets home, he sees his mom and she just has this 1,000-yard stare. This is a great start. Her son just came home, whether it's from a mental institute or as a player thinks for more, and she's like, oh, okay, Alex is here. So that's already like, okay, this is pretty odd. And then you do the Silent Hill thing of trying to interact with every object. As you get more info, you'll learn there's no photos of Alex. But the game points this out. Instead of saying, hey, here's a photo of my mom, dad, brother, mom, dad, the game explicitly tells you there's no photos of Alex. At this point, they might as well just said, man, this is nuts. It's almost like my family doesn't love me. Crazy. And it doesn't end there. So there's a number in this game, 206. Now, during the game, you might find some puzzles that have the number 206, and you might even find some files with the number 206 written on it. There's even an ending at the end where you see the patient at the start of the game of room 206 who was getting electric shock therapy was actually just Alex, and this entire adventure was nothing but a delusion as he was trying to hide from the fact he killed his brother. This would be cool. I'd even argue this ending is one of my favorite Silent Hill endings because they foreshadowed it at the very start of the game. But once more, they flat out tell you that the number 206 plays a critical part. Within the first hour, you meet a guy who says, yeah, all the clocks are broken at the same time, 206. Weird, it's just a prominent number. Crazy. Like, why would you reveal that? That is the base of my frustration with this game. It has good ideas, but then decides to either overtly tell you or just never use them. It's the opposite of The Room, where even if you don't like what they tried, they went full throttle. Here, the thing isn't even in park. Honestly, this is the only Silent Hill game I can never see myself going back to. But even this game is, I'd say, like a 2 at worst. I'd even call it a 3 and saying it's just okay. I will say that some of the complaints against it are overblown. It's not a great game by any means, but there's no need to make stuff up. Point in case, near the end of the game, you find a person who's been stabbed and you can go ahead and heal them by removing the knives. I saw in my research on the Silent Hill wiki, well, this is bad medical advice. In real life, you shouldn't do this. My brother and Alessa, if you are seeking medical advice from a Silent Hill video game, not even God can help you. Again, the game isn't great, but there's no need to be nitpicky. The silliest one, there was a review, and it was talking about Akira Yamaoka's music, which is great here. He actually had a lot of fun with Homecoming because with the power of the PS3, he said he was able to really experiment with surround sound. Someone wrote that that's a negative. Yeah, they wrote that Akira's music is too good for this terrible game. They docked points for the music being too good. Yeah, man, you need help if you're going that far with your hatred of this game. And once more, again, unless I'm doing a video, I don't really see myself going back to Homecoming. Heck, I still have a lot of footage here, so maybe one day I'll just churn out a video real quick because I have the footage, but After playing it and beating it a few times, unlike Origins or The Room, I don't see myself ever coming back to Homecoming. Thankfully, Climax would come in like an avenging angel and show us that Homecoming was honestly just a misstep.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life.
Shattered Memories is probably the game that's been played least of all Silent Hill games, and that's a damn shame. So Climax is back. After the success of Origins, they were put to work on a new property within Silent Hill. Originally, Shattered Memories was supposed to be something else, a first-person shooter called Brahms PD, where you played as an amnesiac detective who was looking for their partner. In between the action, there would be psychology sessions with a therapist that would then affect the gameplay. Konami was like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. So the idea was scrapped. Maybe the idea of a Silent Hill first-person shooter would be a travesty, but hey, I'm all for new ideas, and I think that concept actually sounds super interesting. Unfortunately, it was turned down, and the only thing that was kept was the therapy sessions. Another idea was for it to be called Silent Hill Cold Heart, where it would be more of a survival game based in the cold, where you had to scavenge to stay warm. Konami again wasn't really biting. But since they had already greenlight a remake of Part 1, Climax just rejiggered that idea of Cold Heart into a remake for the Wii. Yes, this is the first Silent Hill game to be released on a Nintendo system, and no, I am not counting the visual novel that was released for the Game Boy Advance. So Shattered Memories is the first for a Nintendo system, and a game that was being made towards casual gamers. The idea, according to Tom Hewlett, was that as a new entry to the series, it would be easy for new fans to get into. Even though only 2 Silent Hill games are directly connected, parts 1 and 3, higher numbers can turn people off who don't know that fact. Example, I kinda want to get into the Yeast series, but there's so many. Even though I've heard that I don't really need to play them all in order, I still kinda feel like I have to, and that's a daunting task. So with that first-hand experience, I can completely see why Climax would want a fresh starting point for newer players. And in regards to the fan base of the Wii, you have to remember, the Wii sold like hotcakes covered in the finest of crystal methamphetamines. We're talking about that blue stuff you can only get down in Albuquerque. You probably know someone that owned a Wii and only a Wii. That is also why one of Shattered Memories' more contentious editions took place in that there was no combat. The team felt that horror games had become too action-oriented, and that horror games with limited combat were becoming something of a lost art. Honestly, I feel that the 2 remake and only a few other games are a good example of limited combat done well. So this was for more casual players. Sam Barlow, the lead designer, mentioned that from personal experience he had a girlfriend that was trying out a game but stopped as soon as combat was initiated. So the goal was for a more casual audience, and it was also to break a trend. See, mature games for the Wii didn't really sell that well, and this was something that the team was asked on more than one occasion, how Resident Evil, or even Dead Space, yes, there was a Dead Space for the Wii, had performed below expectations. Sam defended his game, stating that he feels the reason those others mentioned failed is because they were rail shooters, which is a pretty niche genre anyway. So he contended those games were placed on the Wii simply for the motion controls, as opposed to crafting a game for the Wii and then naturally incorporating said controls into the game. And yeah, unlike a lot of things just tossed on the Wii, Shattered Memories does a great job using the technology to its advantage, and they got to keep most everything they wanted. Tom Hewlett cites this as his favorite game he worked on when he was working on Silent Hill, and said there were only a few things that were left on the cutting room floor. Like initially they wanted to use data from the user's Mii, which I would imagine that would be having Mii data of friends and family populate the game, and they also wanted the game to mimic the weather that the player was currently experiencing, having the user's data mimic real-time weather effects, as in it might be raining in your town and it's suddenly raining in the game. That didn't make it, but honestly what's left is great. I know I put a warning at the beginning, I was going to spoil a lot of these games, but I'm doubling down that I'm going to spoil this game because I honestly feel like it's that good. So it starts with a psychology warning that the game plays you as much as you play it. Basically what happens is that when you answer questions and where you look at the game, it then collects various data in the background and uses that data to alter locations, how the characters look and act, the enemies, and even the ending. This was much lauded as a great use of a morality system. Most games tend to be rather linear. It's always, do you want to help the kids save the orphanage, or do you be like, man, fuck them kids? Which, yeah, always, fuck them kids. Here, it's based on what the player does in both gameplay sections, where in one part you play as Harry looking for his daughter during a snowstorm after having a car crash, and therapy sessions with Dr. Kaufman. It's almost a form of whiplash. Kaufman will ask you to talk about the car accident, and then you play said accident. And then he'll shift right back where he'll ask you about your sex life, if you were a virgin in high school, if you were a slut. Apparently the team all had a session with a therapist in order to get a better feel for therapy sessions, and these are pretty memorable. One of the sessions, Kaufman makes you paint a house, so I did, only for the game to shift and all the colors I painted being the colors of the home, the car, and what the people were wearing. Yeah, it's a purple house, what are you gonna do? When you're not in therapy, you're as Harry, and the Wiimote acts as your flashlight, with the Wiimote audio doubling as a radio, so you can find strange occurrences. With your cell phone, you can use it to take pictures, get photos, and voicemails regarding certain events, and fleshing out the town that while it's abandoned now because of a snowstorm, it's lived in. There was happiness and there was tragedy. Your phone can be used to call numbers. You can even call the Konami helpline, where the person on the other end tells you, I see you're calling for Silent Hill. You are beyond my help. With no combat, the game relies on puzzles, and once more, Climax did a fantastic job. My favorite is where you have to unlock the principal's computer, and the way to unlock it is you have to find the answers to his password, and you do that by looking around his office for said clues. Finally, there are the nightmare sections, which are hit and miss. The goal is to find the end. The only issue is I found myself circling back more than once, and it's pretty difficult to orient yourself and find the exit. As you're running, the enemies, the Rorschachs, they won't kill you, but they'll just make you pass out and bring you to the start of the chase. Which I kinda like. I really hate it in video games when they ask you, would you like to continue? Yes, of course, don't ask me again please. I wish there was an option to not be asked again. I'm on the side that this is the weakest aspect of the game. I really like the ice motif used throughout, Tom Hewlett's explanation being that we saw how in part 2, the other worlds can be different, so there's no need for this industrial wasteland in every single game. Let's have personal otherworlds. As you progress through the game, you get to the end, and the twist, unlike Homecoming, is universally loved. Unlike what the game led you to believe, that Harry was having these sessions in the future, and at the time where he's in the town or in the past, this is all happening at once. Harry isn't having therapy, but rather it's his daughter Cheryl, who's now an adult, and not the young kid that Harry was looking for. Because Harry actually died when Cheryl was young, dying in a car accident after her parents' divorce, and she just never accepted that. That's why these nightmare sequences happen when things don't align with Harry's perceived reality, when he hears things like Cheryl isn't a little girl anymore because she's trying to repress that memory, trying to repress the truth that this version of her dad never really existed. Yes, her father loved her, but this idea of the hero braving the storm was just something to comfort her. And if you did a good job, focused on just finding her and wasn't distracted, you get the good ending where Cheryl finally accepts the truth with this memory of her father the hero, relaying that he'll always be with her because she's a part of him as the hero freezes and shatters. And you get a prologue of the final moments where Cheryl sees Harry and he relates that sometimes adults just stop loving each other, but he still loves her in a rather bittersweet statement. If you didn't do that and you were focused on sex, drugs, or goofed around, seemed uninterested in therapy, or answered cruelly to questions, you'll get endings where this false version of Harry informs Cheryl to simply forget him. And you'll see that Harry wasn't a good father, he was a drunk, or he was a womanizer. There is another ending where you discover Harry wasn't an abusive father, but unfortunately Cheryl did have a bad family life because Harry was in an abusive relationship. Dahlia would emotionally and mentally abuse him, calling him a shit writer who can't provide for his family, stating, "What kind of man are you?" and she would also hit him. The final ending is one of the most heartbreakingly beautiful things ever written, not just in Silent Hill, but in games in general. During this bad ending, Cheryl just refuses to accept her father's death, saying her dad was a hero, he wasn't the man who died. As she sticks to her delusions, the false version of Harry just simply states, "I'm not even a ghost." Again, that is so tragically painful, and it isn't obvious. I think this game is great. It won many publications' Best Wii Game of the Year, many stating it's an underrated gem and one of the best games for the Wii. Many reviewers praised its themes, inventive use of the Wiimote, environment, the use of the therapy session, and Climax's ambition in remaking the first game into something fresh and unique. Tom Hewlett considers this his magnum opus, with once more the one sore spot being those nightmare sequences. Sadly, the game didn't sell as well as one hoped. They were able to break even with a port to the PS2 and the PSP, with the PSP getting the harshest reviews, but still, Climax was given credit for somehow fitting a Wii game onto what is essentially a souped-up PS1. It didn't reverse that trend of M-rated games not doing great on the Wii, and honestly, I feel like it shouldn't be M-rated. It really feels like this is T for teen at best. There's no gore. Yeah, there are references to drugs, alcohol, and the lewd playthrough can be risque, but no more than a Dead or Alive game. I think a teen rating would have honestly helped, but Climax were really in an unenviable position. They wanted to make a game for casuals, but the marketing, according to Sam, tried to make it that it was a core mainline series. And yeah, I don't think having it rated T for teen would have made the fan base very happy. There's an absurd idea that a higher rating is better for horror, but I disagree. After all, The Frighteners is one of my favorite movies come Halloween. It's PG-13 at best. The MPAA gave it an R, but director Peter Jackson was hired to do a PG-13 movie and argued hard to get that rating. And it's a great film about ghosts that adds some humor to a movie about a serial killer continuing his rampage on the living in the afterlife. So you can definitely have a T for teen while being a great horror experience, which I feel this is. But sadly, Shattered Memories in its best form is stuck on the Wii because of the motion controls. It's really great, and it's starting to show that Silent Hill's supposed downfall was more of a bumpy road. And that's not me foreshadowing. I honestly really like the next game, Downpour, also.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life.
So after this, Silent Hill went on a bit of a lull. No more yearly releases. Instead, it would take 3 years before we would wander once more into that sleepy town in Maine. And also, Climax seemed to no longer be involved, oddly enough. Even though they made 2 great games in Origins and Shattered Memories, various studios were instead assigned to multiple Silent Hill projects. Vatra Studios was given the gargantuan task of the next mainline Silent Hill project, and this had people worried. Because while many on the team were former 2K members, some who worked on the Mafia series, which are pretty good games, so much I don't like the whole GTA clone name attached to it, that was only some members, and this was a new studio who had only developed 1 game as a team, that being Russian Attack X Patriot, that I don't think anyone here has ever really played, and came out to middling reviews. The reason Konami chose them over anyone else was because they wanted the game to use the Unreal Engine, and Vatra fit the bill. More unease was released around this time because Akira Yamaoka, one of the last mainstays of Team Silent, had opted to go ahead and leave Konami. This of course led to the rumor that Yamaoka hated the direction of the series so much he decided to just leave. There is no indication of this being factual. An interview with Norihiko Hibino, famed composer for various Metal Gear games, revealed that it's not really that uncommon nowadays for many composers to go freelance, because back in the day, if you were wanting to get into music, video games was the place to be. If you wanted to start a career, game studios had access to equipment and programs that just weren't readily available to the masses. It's not like today that any jerkwad, myself included, can get a mic and fire up a free version or a totally non-pirated version of a sound editor. So we saw many people actually go freelance like Uematsu and Yoko Shimomura, while still doing work with the company they started with. And I imagine being freelance gives them more power in regards to what they create, since after all, if you create something for a company, they just own it and not you. But this was the internet. There was no time for a rational discussion. Yamaoka left because he hated it, and even worse, this game was going to be a first-person shooter. Another rumor because Vatra listed their specialty as first-person shooters and action games, so people decided this must be an FPS, even though Konami shot down the totally cool as heck Brahms PD. Oh, and then Korn got involved. That didn't help at all. Konami decided that Korn would be a great band to herald the new coming of Silent Hill. Nobody wanted this. Korn, for the younger viewers, were seen as one of the pioneers of nu metal, a sound that helped define the 90s. And yeah, growing up in that era, if Korn plays on the radio, first I have an existential crisis that is on the classic rock station, and right after I will be bebopping and scatting along with Jonathan Davis for Freak on a Leash, Got the Life, you name it. The only issue is those songs came out in the 90s, and it was now 2012. Nu metal had already peaked and died as a genre for a good decade when Korn was assigned to the intro song. Tom Hewlett in an interview explained he had no decision over this, that Konami has a licensing division, and they thought, yeah man, Korn, that's the guys we need. Which, as a personal anecdote, around this time I had a buddy whose sister's boyfriend was in a local band. He was kind of a scumbag, but anyway, she was so hyped saying, they're gonna open for Korn, they're gonna open for Korn. And we just thought, wow, that would be great news in 1998. So yeah, people were not hyped for Korn. They did one of those change.org petitions, you know, the ones that have no legal basis and honestly your efforts are better used elsewhere. Tom Hewlett did his best to arrange some damage control to assure fans that in Downpour, things would be different. Firstly, he made sure to mention Pyramid Head would not appear unless there was a really good reason. He and Devin Shatsky, another producer, said that Downpour would take inspiration from Silent Hill 2. So that's the third game that they've stated they're going to take inspiration from Part 2. It's not like there aren't other Silent Hill games. They also reiterated that while it would take inspiration, it would not be a copy and paste of the twist that many felt happened in Homecoming. They also talked about the growth of survival horror with Dead Space and Resident Evil, and that it's a bit more difficult for Silent Hill because Silent Hill is more about the psychological aspect, and that they want to improve the gameplay, but they don't want it to be an action game. Similar to Part 2, they stated Downpour will be a story about a man summoned to Silent Hill. This all seemed great, but the demos didn't help sentiments. IGN got to try out the game a month and a half before its Japanese release, and they noted how absolutely busted the game was. As they stated, they felt it was doubtful it would be polished in such a short amount of time, and they were right. The rare IGN dub, ladies and gentlemen. Downpour came out broken upon release and turned a lot of people off, because yeah, if you're gonna pay $60 for a game, maybe make sure it works. It suffered from massive drops in frame rate, the game just crashing, and also the game not saving your data. It had an autosave function that just never autosaved. So the game would crash, you would boot it up, only to start at the beginning. A patch was made to improve things, and on my PS3, there was really only 2 spots where the frame rate dropped to the single digits and only 1 crash. I have heard it works better on Xbox systems since it has that backwards performance boost, but I don't own an Xbox, so PS3 it was. I never got to play the original Busted experience, so my ride was pretty pleasant. Downpour feels more underappreciated than even Shattered Memories. You start as a prisoner named Murphy, and the intro is you violently attacking someone else. The tutorial is you maybe murdering a guy. Before, if you're able to see if the deed is done, we fast forward a few months to the start of the game. You're going to be transferred to another facility when your bus gets into an accident, and you're called into Silent Hill. Now, Murphy's status as a convict and lack of fog were intentional. The team wanted to see if players could relate to someone we just saw committing a violent crime. Along with that, instead of fog, the game decides to use rain as the main spook meter. This was also deliberate, again, because the other world can appear to others in an assortment of ways, And I do like the rain motif. It fits Murphy's story, and after all, rain usually means you have to stay inside, and he's always stuck inside. It also plays into one of the main inspirations of the game being the film The Shawshank Redemption, near the end where the main character, Andy Dufresne, crawls through a sewage pipe and is able to escape into freedom where it is raining heavily. And as the famous quote goes, he crawled through a sewer of shit and came clean through the other side. So it also represents the cleaning properties of water, as it relates to Murphy's sins. It can also be because rain, if it gets too much, can prove hazardous. So I think overall the rain motif is rather well used. Here the rain means more monsters, so while you are trying to escape, it now means you have to find shelter. Another cool change is that the radio is now a police radio, so instead of static, it will be police reports that alert you to the presence of monsters. And speaking of monsters, that's this game's only real failing. The monsters look uninspired and do nothing, which is a shame because similar to Homecoming, there's a lot of material they can work with. Murphy's kid is dead and his wife left him. There's a plethora of material in regards to violent crime and its lasting effects that can linger long after the crime itself. They could examine the prison system, the violence that occurs, and how we as a society tend to otherize prisoners. I've heard more than once that people think anyone who commits a violent crime, we should just execute them and give them the chair. That's not to mention the psychological damage that solitary confinement can do to the brain, how companies profit off of prisons, encouraging beds are full, even minor offenses. The school to prison pipeline, including the imprisoning of children, with some states, and I kid you not, in the same year reducing their school budgets while also increasing their prison budgets. There's also the recidivism rate, guaranteeing that once you're in prison, they're gonna keep you in there. Man, I barely scratched the surface, and there's more to say about our broken justice system, but the game doesn't really explore that, so the monsters are just, I'm a scary prisoner. I'm a bigger scary prisoner. I'm your wife that yelled at you. This is disappointing, especially since the monsters are such a big part of Silent Hill. Its other critique being that Silent Hill still hadn't really figured out combat. For combat here, you don't really get an assortment of weapons. You can only carry 2 weapons at the most. You can't even carry multiple types of ammo. So you're just gonna have to carry a weapon and a spare. And since you can't carry ammo, that means you have to rely on melee. In Stranger of Paradise, this isn't. It's really simple. Block, hit, block, and then stab them when they're down. And similar to Origins, there's no indications as to when something will break, so I found myself replacing old weapons just to avoid that. Some reviewers did complain you needed certain items for certain barriers. This was similar to Homecoming, how you would need an axe for a barricaded door, a knife for tarps. But unlike Homecoming, where you would always have your knife or your axe in order to unlock any doors, here, once more, you can only carry 2 types of weapons, so you might not have the specific weapon needed to break down a barricade or unhook a ladder. I never found this an issue because whenever I needed something like a hook, it was literally right in front of my face or never too far away and never really required any backtracking. Again, that's really the only issues with this game, post-patch, and Downpour has so much to offer. Firstly, there really aren't any of the familiar trappings of Silent Hill. Buildings that suddenly become labyrinthine areas requiring you to open every door in the hopes of finding the one that isn't locked, to then find an occult puzzle. Rather, you can explore the town of Silent Hill itself and take parts in various side quests. Now, I will admit I groaned a little. This is mostly because remembering this generation's idea of increasing the length of game time was just being generic side quests where you have to find an untold number of items scattered throughout the world to get a trophy and maybe one new dialogue showing you did the thing. I literally turned off Assassin's Creed 2 as soon as the game told me, collect 100 bird feathers for your dead brother. No, I'm good. I'm happy to see Vatra didn't do that. All the side quests are honestly really good and play into the themes of crimes, vengeance, punishment, escapism, and repentance. And all have that distinct Silent Hill feel. Some of my favorites are this one where a murder took place. Murphy is able to turn back time in this house because physics are whatever in this town, and he sees that the husband killed the wife. The husband's spirit then gets out of his painting to kill Murphy, so you gotta burn his picture and send him right back to hell. There's also another where you can enter a movie, once more showing that theme of escapism, one where you gotta spot the differences in a mirror, take too long and this invisible monster you read a note about will attack you, and you need to use the mirrors to track them. The saddest is a woman who had a child with developmental issues. She used ribbons to direct the child home, a la yellow means keep going, blue means turn back. The child went missing only for Murphy to discover this mother killed her own child, feeling that taking care of her kid made her feel like she was trapped, that she was in a prison. Thus, she set her ribbons, that way the kid would fall into a lake and drown. Many of these side quests reward you with health, sometimes weapons, but honestly the reward is the quest itself in my opinion. If you don't do the side quests, the game would be rather short, but again, the side quests are so good it never felt like a drag. Plus, doing them, you can find a lot of supplemental info to flesh out a great story. Some people weren't a huge fan of the Otherworld, and I do love it, but I do have issues. My main issue is each time you get a chase sequence from the Void, which is Murphy's fear of getting caught. This is a shame because when you get to explore the Otherworld, it takes on once more this rain motif, and is an active participant in Murphy's journey. The first time you escape, you run into a stairway and it goes on forever. It took me a minute or two to realize, wait, does this just never end? The only way to escape is to actually go against your senses and go in the opposite direction, and somehow going back leads you forward. Other times, the area will elongate, and this seemed to be an Otherworld that was tailor-made and not a former decayed factory, but rather a prison. My favorite are times when you look up and see this impossible structure blocking your line of sight, showing that there does exist something outside the area. There's also the great use of clocks representing the slow march of time that is prison life. I love the Otherworld in this game. The one sticking point is that you don't really get time to truly appreciate it, as every single time it's a chase sequence with the Void. I really think it should have been that one sequence, you wash your hands of that ordeal, and then you're able to fully explore more of this world. As you progress through the game, you learn the true nature of Murphy's crime, and once again, like with Shattered Memories, I would advise anyone who has not played Downpour to skip. So Murphy had a son who was abducted and killed by a pedophile named Charles Napier, who was their neighbor. Charles assaulted Murphy's son and then drowned him in the river, hence the water motif that plays throughout the game. The death of their child caused Murphy's wife to leave him, and the only thing Murphy was focused on was revenge. So he stole a police cruiser and pled guilty to go to jail and find the man that hurt his son. And that's how we got the start of the game, as he was beating up Charles, an assault that was set up by a crooked CEO named George Sewell, who really is a piece of work. At first, when I was in the Otherworld, I thought the use of the song Born Free was a tad bit on the nose, until it's revealed George would sing it because he's just a colossal prick. George arranged the beating not out of kindness, but rather so Murphy would owe him one, and Charles's fate is left ambiguous. While going through Silent Hill, Murphy encounters another corrections officer who has it in for him named Anne, who, like many, Silent Hill called to because it calls to broken people, and she really is one. After seeing an officer badge, she literally breaks down. Eventually, you confront the image of Charles and the boss known as the Boogeyman, and in a great moment about redemption, Murphy admits that attacking Charles didn't help anything. His son was still dead, and if anything, it made things worse. He spent all this time thinking it would provide relief, but it just filled him with emptiness. Along your travels, you also meet a radio DJ named Bobby who's stuck in Silent Hill, caught in a loop of his own making. I really dig this. Bobby is stuck asking for help, and that's the reason he's stuck, because he can't find the courage to take those first steps himself. Nearing the end of your journey, you encounter Anne once more, where she talks of the town as if it's a real person and that it's shown her things, that it knows her, and the only way it will let them go if they settle their business. A line that makes it clear from previous games, everyone knows why they're in Silent Hill. Some simply deny it. Anne shoots Murphy as we go to the final Otherworld, and all the pieces fall into place. Here you get a good deal of time to actually marvel at the Otherworld, which is what I wanted for most of the game. It's also revealed that the favor that Murphy owed George was to murder another CO, Frank Coolidge, one of the nicest people there and someone that looked out for Murphy. It's unclear whether Murphy actually murdered him, but Frank was attacked, and you fight the manifestation of Frank known as the Wheelman. In a side note, my biggest gripe with Homecoming was how it was as subtle as the naming convention for an isekai anime based on a light novel. Here, they went the inverse, and it's fantastic. On a second playthrough, I began to notice these wheelchairs, which I thought were originally just out-of-place objects, only to realize the game was foreshadowing Murphy's guilt. After defeating the Wheelman, you get the best twist of the game. Nay, I say it ranks up there with one of the best in Silent Hill. The Wheelman wasn't a manifestation of Murphy's guilt, but of Anne's. Because Frank was her father and he survived the attack, but he was reduced to a vegetative state. As Anne angrily describes, the man she loved became a monster, unable to feed or clean himself. Angry at Murphy for killing her father, Murphy then turns into the boogeyman himself. Now, I don't think he literally transforms, but rather this is how Anne sees Murphy. This is the man that murdered her father. It's her final boss battle, and you can actually die and lose and get a new ending where the roles are reversed, where Anne is now a prisoner and Murphy is the CO because she became the thing she accused him of, being a murderer. Honestly, again, a top tier ending. If you fight Anne, you can choose to spare her or kill her. Mix that with other more choices, you get one of 4 endings. The bad endings are where, yes, Murphy killed Frank, and in the darkest one, he actually killed his son and then placed the blame on Charles. And the good ends where you spare Anne, she realizes that Murphy didn't kill Frank, it was actually George Stilwell. And in the best ending, George also killed Charles, as Murphy was unable to go ahead and do it. Anne lets Murphy go, and it's clear her new target is George. There's actually an error here. See, in the second best ending, Murphy doesn't kill anyone, not even Charles. But this was a change because the team didn't want to make Murphy a killer. But I disagree with that choice. Killing Charles but not Frank adds so much more to the game, especially with his whole monologue regarding revenge bringing nothing but emptiness. Overall, again, I really enjoyed the experience with this game, and I'm not the only one. Famed Team Silent Monster creator Masahiro Ito was actually hired to do the Japanese artwork for Downpour, and he says he likes it. And most people agree it's a bit of an unpolished gem. That yes, it has its flaws, but what's here, the characters, the stories, the things that make Silent Hill, are worthwhile and worth the trek. Though it does have some unfortunate elements, unlike Homecoming, I want more of Downpour. I actually see myself liking Homecoming less with all of its flaws, because Downpour was still able to be a satisfying experience with its own set of flaws. And it does a great job of moving the Silent Hill formula forward with something new. The ideas of sins and redemptions are there, but there are also themes of freedom and punishment. Murphy isn't a bad guy, he's someone who, because of his pain, made bad decisions. And along with Travis, I see him as an underrated protag. I can very easily see myself playing this game again, and there was even a planned DLC with Anne, and I'm salty we never got that. It would show us her side, how she sees the town, how it reacts to her, because while yes, she is a CO, she's allowed to go home, she still spends a lot of time in prison, and she really added to the story as a dual protagonist. Sadly, Vatra Studios would get shut down after this game, and the next 2 titles would unfortunately sink Downpour's reputation, as they were made around the same time, and stole any spotlight in regards to the discussion of the series as a whole.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life.
The much maligned Silent Hill HD remakes came out within the same week of Downpour, and in some regions, they actually came out on the same day. The Vita exclusive Book of Memories was actually supposed to come out the week after. And Jesus, Konami, 3 games in a 2-week pay period? Why are you just trying to drain people's wallets? Have some self-respect. Now, the HD remakes have been dogged, well, mostly the remake of Part 2. But again, this falls a lot on Konami. Firstly, to be clear, there's a difference between having something run natively on a new console and emulating it. Secondly, this falls on Konami hiring a new crew like Hijinks Studios, whose only games before this was the middling Vandal Hearts and also a Frogger game. They were facing an uphill battle. While yes, porting a game leaves out a lot of the concept and pre-production that goes into the development cost of a game, you still have an entire game to develop to run on new hardware. Again, making a game run natively on new hardware isn't the same as emulation. It's nowhere near as easy as some people make it seem, like, oh, I can run a game on my Raspberry Pi, so why can't developers make an HD port for the PS3? To add to that, the builds that the studios had access to were not the final builds, but rather a pre-bug build. So they had to try to find any bugs while also developing said game. And Hijinks didn't really have access to any, resources that could help. See, while researching this, there was a time where HD remasters were the hot thing. Some were obviously better than others. Ones that seemed to cut above were things like God of War and Sly Cooper. And the reason being that both teams had a treasure trove of access to archived materials and former team members. And this is important because if you're like me, you've probably seen a metric ton of YouTube gaming videos, only to discover that while games do look finished, if you look underneath the hood, it seems the only reason they're running is via a combination of duct tape, bubblegum, and prayers to any convenient deity. So access to former developers to tell you any lines that might be puzzling or workarounds they use to make the game work are pretty invaluable. Without access to that, and again, Konami was the type to know a game was busted a month before release and still release it, the HD remake was put out to the world only to have a swarm of anger come at them. Besides the game being so broken that trophies caused the game to crash and having audio issues that permeated both titles, the worst treatment was to Part 2, in that the HD glow up was actually a glow down. Masahiro Ito even remarked seeing screenshots that it looked a mess and posited that maybe it was technical issues from the PS3. It didn't help that the fog was removed. While the high definition allowed one to see details that were previously unseen, the removal of the fog also removed a main component of what gave Silent Hill 2 its ethereal feeling. Part 3 actually fared a good deal better because it was less reliant on fog and the game being in a more constrained setting. That along with its color palettes, with 2 using more cool and soft colors, while 3 was very much red and black. The HD glow-up actually really benefited Silent Hill 3, with many reviewers having no aggravation, and saying they actually prefer it compared to its PS2 incarnation. People were also incensed that there were no special features, nothing, just 2 games. And people were also divided if other games should have been added. Saw a few comments saying, the room isn't a real Silent Hill game, but it should have been there. Which, make up your mind, do you want it there or not? Tom Hewlett even remarked when asked about the absence of Part 4 that they weren't even sure if people even wanted the room. They have only been saying it wasn't a real Silent Hill game for the past decade after all. Last but not least, there was controversy regarding the voices in the game. So because of James' voice actor Guy Seehee wanting residuals, which just isn't a thing in video games, they're a one and done deal, and it's something that's become a hot topic in recent years, that voice actors aren't as valued and they are underpaid. Michael Hollick from GTA 4 was paid about $100,000, which seems like a lot until you remember GTA 4 grossed $600 million. So he got paid $100,000 for 15 months of work, and I did the math. That amounts to being paid about $41.67 an hour. To put that into perspective, at my job, I've seen listings for multiple positions to make that much, and what they do isn't seen by millions of people. So it's a case where morally I agree with Guy, but legally I recognize he has no standing as he signed a contract. I can disagree with that contract, but not much I can do besides raise awareness. Well, unless you're NFT shill Troy Baker, who thinks it's fine for companies to screw people over. Legit, I thought the NFT shill thing would be the dumbest thing, and maybe he was perturbed over having to deal with gamers telling him he sucked at his job, so he laid the blame on Guy, which was technically true, but he went above and beyond, stating, "You never bash the people who gave you a huge leg up, no matter what they've done to you or what you feel they've done." Wow, that is the worst thing I ever read. Imagine just saying, wait, someone needs to defend a multi-million-dollar company in regards to how they pay their voice actors. Again, maybe he was tired, but yeah, if you feel like you were wronged, it could be the nicest game company in the world, but if you feel like you were wronged, it's right to say it and advocate for that cause. So because of that disagreement, everyone was recast. Guy eventually relented, and so you could play with the original or new voices. And besides Troy Baker, they got some big names to do this. In my original video regarding the 2 remake, I noticed how I like these people, but they seem too professional. In Silent Hill 2, a lot of what makes it is that off-kilter feeling that these characters aren't really right. Even with that said, I was a bit too harsh, and once more, this comes down to Konami. During research, I discovered that Konami didn't redo the lip syncs for the game. So even NFT shill Troy Baker admits it was a challenge because now he had to match someone else, so instead of it being this is how I would do this scene, instead he had to match the sync of the original, and that can remove things like tone, intonation, cadence, and everything that goes into a voice and voice acting itself. So a lot of the actors really can't be blamed when Konami handicapped them from the start. So yeah, unfortunately the 2 remake wasn't that good, and the 3 remake, people tend to be more on the positive side. And there's no transition, we'll just talk about Book of Memories. It was a Vita game that was the last Silent Hill game for quite a while. Originally Konami had envisioned it as a DS game that was more traditional, but it was just seen as not feasible at the time. The idea of Book of Memories actually came from a planned multiplayer option for Downpour, but the crew felt it didn't fit Downpour, and so that multiplayer option became its own thing, which I respect. I talked about the filter. Another thing big with games that generation was multiplayer. Everything had to have multiplayer. Even single player games that never had it suddenly needed it. I recalled getting the new Tomb Raider a few years after release and was astounded that there was a multiplayer mode. I tried it, people were still playing it, and I got absolutely demolished. Because the only people still playing that mode were people that had mastered it. Konami decided instead of just adding it on, Book of Memories would be its own thing. The idea was a multiplayer game where you would do dungeon crawls in short spurts. I played it for a bit, picking the goth girl because hey, can't get a big titty goth? I'll just become the big titty goth. That makes sense, right fellas? Right? I knew this game would be a 3, and after the first stage, it was clear that this was all the game had to offer. And most reviews seem to agree that it was just okay in short sessions, which is what the game was envisioned as anyway. Some people were more critical, deriding that a dungeon crawler Silent Hill is a betrayal of the brand, which, firstly, it's Konami, they can do with it what they want. Secondly, it's a handheld. Handhelds are made for experimental side games. And lastly, you can't say how great Silent Hill is, while also saying it can't be other things. One of my favorite games that I did a video on was Stranger of Paradise, the Final Fantasy Neo game. So yes, give me your weird games. Give me Brahms PD. Give me a Silent Hill JRPG as long as it's good. Who cares? Now before we go on, there is someone we have to mention, and that someone is Tom Hewlett, who I've quoted multiple times, and we need to talk about his treatment by the fans. Tom was a Silent Hill fan and was more than happy to talk and discuss any new projects, and thus all the heat for anything fans didn't like fell onto him. In retrospect, many see it as Konami just tossing him to the wolves. He had many different roles, from associate producer, executive, writer, and director. He was not solely responsible for the product post The Room. Again, Konami okayed everything, but fans didn't see it that way. No, it was Tom, his iron fist, and his hatred of the series that kept it the way it was, according to them. Every word he said became twisted. For instance, he once said he's not a big fan of the cult storyline and much preferred the psychological aspect of the series. That was bastardized to Tom Hewlett hates Silent Hill 1. Tom mentions that Konami never punished him for the bad press, but they also never helped him out either, because again, for many he was seen as a scapegoat. The public treatment actually gave him really bad anxiety. He spoke how he was afraid he might not have a job in video games anymore because employers would Google him and see all the negative press, which is terrible because Tom is a fan of the series, and he did his best to steer the ship in a positive direction. Thankfully, he still has a job. He now works with WayForward, helping make Bloodstained, and oddly enough recently directing another Konami property with Contra Operation Galaga, which, while receiving mixed reviews, the mix tends to lean positive. I tried to contact him via socials, but he's a private person and I'm a Z-list YouTuber, so I can't honestly blame him. He's still a fan of the series. He's confirmed he's played the Part 2 remake, and he even stated, okay, now do Downpour. I honestly wish him all the best and hope one day he can be brought back to do something in Silent Hill, because again, he deserves it. It's clear he loved Silent Hill and cared about the future of the series. Throughout all the interviews I scoured, his main philosophy was, does this fit? He even talked about doing something with virtual reality with Silent Hill, but only if it made sense. He never wanted to do something to do it, but rather if it made sense to the overall story, which is a creative philosophy I can respect. And in recent years, most fans realized that laying all the blame on him was silly and dumb. But after this game, we had about 10 years to go ahead and start thinking about said things.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life.
Now, with that history of games after Silent Hill 2, you might be wondering, wait, you had praise for literally every new game, minus Homecoming and Book of Memories. How is it that so many people think Silent Hill was in a bad state? Do I just have shit taste? I mean, I do, but not this time. I can see various factors at play here. The first and most obvious is, well, the internet and YouTube. I saw something recently that said, that's a cute opinion, what YouTuber did you get that from? And yeah, I know that might sound silly coming from me as I upload to YouTube, and reviews have been a thing with magazines for literal years, if not decades. However, YouTube videos can be something else. We've all heard of parasocial relationships, maybe because you can see these people, so you can take their words more at heart. It's no longer, hey, I looked at some reviews and seeing at what this game has, I don't think it's just for me. It's become, hey, this one reviewer said it's bad, so it's bad. It's why I try to go as in-depth as possible as to what I like or dislike so that people can make their best judgment if my tastes are terrible, which they are, sometimes, most of the times. Secondly, the reason for all this anguish is to steal from your mother again, but comparison is the thief of joy. Survival horror has honestly done really well the past few years in almost all mediums. We've seen things like Amnesia, the Dead Space series, and of course Resident Evil games released to critical and commercial success. So it's easy to look on in envy and wonder why can't Silent Hill do that? Looking at Resident Evil, one needs to only look at Part 6, which is basically the homecoming of the series. Not critically, but more how the fan base feels about it. I would actually pick 6 over Homecoming, but for many Resi fans, it's seen as a low point of the series. Indicative that Capcom really had no idea of what they were doing, or rather where they were going with the series. So for many fans, they find it to be a disappointing entry. But then after that, Resident Evil came hot out the gate with the critically acclaimed 7, the 2 remake, the not so much beloved 3 remake, the Part 4 remake, and of course Village. It's easy to see that the grass is greener on the other side, but that's forgetting that the time from 6 to 7 took 5 years. Game development is long and arduous, and from all the research I did, it was clear that Konami just didn't want to rest on pachinko money. For real, they make a lot of money on that because it's basically gambling. They wanted to do something with Silent Hill, but they just had no idea how to address the series. And lastly, of course, the reason why people think Silent Hill sucked at this time is because of one man whose shadow eclipsed the series like a malevolent eldritch being. That man was Tetsuya Nomura. Wait, no, hold on, we're not talking about Nomura this time, but rather another man who does share some similarities with him in Hideo Kojima, and of course his creation known as PT. Now, I'll only briefly talk about Kojima. He's been making video games for decades, and he helped popularize the stealth genre with the Metal Gear series. And even back in the day, Christ, add that to another counter for me being old, but back in the day when the discussion was if games are art or not came out, Metal Gear was one of those games people pointed to of being high art, with its smart writing, acting that would fit familiar with a big budget Hollywood movie, cinematography that has inspired countless number of game developers, and of course stories and themes regarding not only the human condition, but how that condition is affected by war, that maybe war is antithetical to the spirit of mankind, that it naturally breaks something inside of us. It explores how it will change you, the loneliness that comes with it, along with socio-political remarks regarding wars, misunderstandings, connections, and more. And I'm just scratching the surface. Not to mention the gameplay, which is still fun almost 30 years later, which not all games can do. Again, I love Silent Hill 1, but it's begging for some quality of life improvements. Metal Gear, along with Silent Hill, was one of the big properties from Konami. Before the final entry in that series was released in August 2014, Hideo Kojima released what was known as PT, or Playable Teaser, a first-person adventure that when finished revealed it was actually a trailer for Silent Hills, the next entry in the series. PT is regarded by many as one of the best video game experiences on the PS4, so people were excited. The next entry in the series would be hailed by video game auteur Hideo Kojima. Countless shorts were ruined, but that bliss was short-lived. After the release of Metal Gear Solid 5, Kojima and Konami parted ways. In the time since, various reports came out that Konami basically secluded Kojima and his crew. They even refused to let Kojima go ahead and accept his award at the annual ad show Circle Jerk, the Video Game Awards. And this wasn't an uncommon occurrence. The Nikkei, which is a big Japanese newspaper, ran a story on how Konami was treating its staff horrible. Blizzard read that report and decided they had to match Konami. The report was pretty damning, showing that Konami treated people under their employ more like prisoners or cattle. Things like monitoring people to ensure they didn't take long lunches, cameras everywhere not for security purposes, but to once more monitor employees. The article described a bleak and miserable existence for the people working at Konami, with morale at low levels. The worst accusations were reassigning people. Now, I thought this was the normal in Japan. Basically, some companies, instead of firing someone and trying to get them to quit, will reassign them to do menial tasks, as in review these papers for error. Really mind-breaking and monotonous work in the hopes that said person quits. Konami did not do that. They went beyond that. Instead, they would reassign people who are game developers to be security guards, cleaning staff at their gyms, or work at pachinko parlors. And it seemed no one was immune to this. According to the article, people who worked on high-profile games were punished in this way. So Kojima's seclusion and treatment was unfortunately par for the course. He and Konami parted ways, and to add insult to injury, PT was delisted. No one really knows why. Konami hasn't said why, so unless you can shell money for a PS4 that has it saved on a system, it's kinda lost to time. Anger over this was immense, because Silent Hills was a game by Kojima and Guillermo del Toro, with monster designs by famous horror mangaka Junji Ito. This was destined to be the greatest game of all time. Now, I hate to burst bubbles, well actually I do enjoy bursting bubbles, but we can't really review products that never got made, but I also think Silent Hills should be looked at with some degree of skepticism. Firstly, Junji Ito was never actually signed on. He had meetings with Kojima, and he said Kojima really wanted him, but Ito was never really on board with it. Maybe that would change with time, but he was never actually hired for the job. I love Del Toro, but the man has an entire Wikipedia article on projects that he stopped, which isn't his fault. He's a very picky person on the projects he accepts, and seeing his breadth of work, he has good reason to be. The thing is, games have more moving parts than films, so it's not a stretch to say that there's a non-zero chance Del Toro would have left the project. And lastly, we have seen what happens when Kojima goes unchained with his video game Death Stranding. That is divisive. You either hate it or you love it. The people who love it cite its acting, settings, and themes of connection as the highlights of the game, while dismissing criticisms of it as people who just simply couldn't get it. Those who hate the game feel like it's a giant walking simulator and dismiss its good qualities as people just so huffed up by hope they've tricked themselves. Personally, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. The people who love the game are correct as to the reasons why it's good, and the people who dislike it are also correct as to some of the greatest flaws in the game, and that it does get in the way of itself in regards to enjoyment. I can go deeper into it, and maybe I will one day do a video regarding MGS5, PT, Silent Hills, and of course Death Stranding, but simply because people imagined Silent Hills would be the greatest thing ever, how we heard for years how Silent Hill wasn't good, many people never actually went and played those games, and because Konami was silent, I personally believe a lot of people tricked themselves into thinking there was no good games post Part 3. And as I said, Konami's silence didn't help. They actually stayed quiet for quite a few years, and many thought they just had no interest in the series at all. It stayed that way until one day in October.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life.
It was October 2022 when we got what was called the Silent Hill transmission. Konami revealed they had massive plans for the series, and there were various projects in the works. This wasn't all of a sudden. Recall how I said game development takes years? After the cancellation of Silent Hills, Konami wanted to continue the series but had no idea how to actually proceed, and there was various disagreements on the path forward. Motoi Okamoto would join Konami in 2018, and he's the one who's spearheading the series revival. It seems he actually has some power as opposed to Tom Hewlett, who had none. It was once more decided that with a new movie coming up, now was the perfect time to kickstart the series. So one autumn night, we got the Silent Hill transmission, where Konami revealed just what they had been planning for all those years and the mountain of content that they were ready to drop onto the starving fan base. Silent Hill F, which looks interesting, after all, it's very Japanese. Silent Hill Townfall, which is what I'm most interested in, an anthology series and outside of Silent Hill. Silent Hill Ascension, which, yeah. A movie adaptation of Silent Hill 2, and finally a remake of Silent Hill 2. Now you would think such an announcement would be met with near universal acclaim. After all, this was a fan base that had nothing. We were surviving on scraps, and now we were getting a full course meal. But no, there was a ton of videos with each new update with people saying this 2 remake is gonna suck. I guarantee it. I myself was skeptical. I hoped it would do well, and my one complaint was that the original 2 still needs to be playable in some way, even if the 2 remake ends up being good. Now, to be fair to the doubters, the first thing released did not help. That was Silent Hill Ascension, and it is pretty bad. So, funny enough, right before watching Ascension, I had actually watched The Wire. Both are series with multiple protagonists that try to weave an interconnected web of plots that relate to a greater theme. But The Wire is considered one of the greatest shows of all time, and it is. If you get anything from this video, watch The Wire. Ascension is not. I basically did the equivalent of having a filet mignon, then washing it down with a can of King Cobra. People hated this. Now again, it seemed interesting, an interactive story that the fans can take part in. Now Ascension has been planned since 2021, and the idea was more of a Telltale adventure except in the world of Silent Hill. And apparently former Telltale staff worked on it, according to the CEO of Genevid, who were in charge of Ascension. He said he was inspired by Twitch Plays Pokemon, and that's where I feel things went off the rails. The idea of a massive interactive story with input from a community, and to make that story be coherent, I just don't think would work. Along with that, it was now a branching storyline, which supposedly would have 35 different endings. And there's just no feasible way to craft a narrative that can branch into 35 different endings and not feel either weak or stretched out. Plus, communities are terrible. The group chat had zero moderation, so of course things like Hideo Kojima coming in my tummies was pinned to the top, along with slurs, of course. The whole community aspect was also a lie, because there was a battle pass and microtransactions. So yes, while the community could vote, those who pay had more say in their votes, which I guess they just emulated the US system, so fair play. All this would be fine if the series was good, but at 25 episodes with around 30 minutes apiece, so about a full season or 2 of an actual TV show, Genevid did not have the money for a full season of an actual TV show. The models and everyone's just look bad, and the writing was so awful people accused that Genevid used AI. Genevid said that's not true, they use zero AI, but I just love how that's become an insult. This has zero creative thought, therefore AI was used. Look, I gotta be honest, this is the only thing I didn't finish. I tapped out around episode 7 and I don't get the impression I missed much. It did win an Emmy, so there's that, in emerging technology, and last I checked it's free on Tubi, but it's not even so bad it's good. You can check it out, but I wouldn't go out of my way. After that, there was another transmission. Personal note, I love the title being called Silent Hill Transmissions, as if it's from the town itself. During another one, Konami actually pulled the Sega Saturn and announced the short message was not only free, but downloadable that very day. The short message was made by Hexadrive. Oh yeah, they're back. Developers of the Third Birthday, and honestly the gameplay is what saves that game because it has a twist that only competitive Smash players will love. Hexadrive actually came to Konami with the hopes of porting Silent Hill 1 for modern systems. That shifted into making a proof of concept demo for Silent Hill 2 Remake. They lost that bid, but Konami liked them so much they instead offered the short message. And while being a free game, it's still impressive the amount of downloads. Up to 2 million people actually went and got the game. Most reviews are that it's okay, it's free, and it's a preview of the future of the series, with most saying they like the general direction. You play as a teenage girl in Germany, so you are not in Silent Hill because they've been trying to leave that town for literal decades. The sole location is an abandoned apartment building that was once going to be part of a large renovation project and part of the town's economic boom, which is no more. And I do like this. While cultures are different, obviously, I feel like many cultures still have aspects of things like loneliness, fear, isolations, or places that seem haunted. I feel they're endemic to really any nation. The game itself deals with issues like bullying, body image, and self-harm, but many felt that these issues weren't done that well. Again, that subtlety thing. The game would show a flashback to, yes, full motion video, How I Missed You. A flashback to one of your friends being like, I love this author, they took their own life. Wink wink, nudge nudge. I'm kinda conflicted, because as people get older, they tend to forget how they acted. For instance, contrary to popular belief, I was once in fact young, many moons ago, when we were called Pangea. And I can tell you for sure, I was cringe as all hell. I thought I was so much smarter than people because I knew how to fit $2 words like dichotomy into conversation. I wouldn't be shocked if there's a screenshot of my younger days on the I am very smart Reddit. I say that, but we also had a Silent Hill game with a teenage protagonist in Heather Mason of Part 3 that dealt really well with the fears of a young girl and also the things women go through. Menstruation was a huge part of that game, along with pregnancy, abortion, fears of sex. So because we have that, I can see why people are upset over the lackluster writing of the short message. The strangest thing it does is it tries to explain the other world with the quote-unquote Silent Hill phenomenon, which don't. Silent Hill is weird. No one knows why it's weird. I like that it could happen anywhere. Don't try to explain it. But I think it did a lot of good and it showed that the series is still alive. And most reviewers seem to agree, so they were more partial, but there was still a lot of fear regarding that 2 remake.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life.
In 2021, Blooper Team got into a partnership with Konami in regards to working on some of their properties. Apparently, Konami did this because of the failure of in-house projects like Metal Gear Survive and also Contra Rogue Corps, which, funny enough, I bought that game twice. No, really, I once saw it on sale for like $5 on PlayStation, bought it, played it for a few minutes, was like, wow, this is not for me. A few months later, I happened to see it on sale for the Switch, completely forgot I had already purchased this game, and yup, I ended up purchasing it again for an entirely different system. I swear, even though I'm putting this in my video, I bet you it'll be on sale on Steam for a few bucks. I'll forget I bought it twice and get it a third time for $5. This is how Konami's gonna make money on this. Anyway, my obvious mental issues aside, Konami decided it would be better to go ahead and have other people work on their properties while they took on a more producer's role, which isn't bad, and honestly I want more studios to do this, with more than just AAA titles. Looking at you, Square. So Blooper and Konami joined hands, and people already knew it was something Silent Hill based by their portfolio. Things like Layers of Fear, which has some of the worst sequel titling, and especially The Medium. I played the first few moments of The Medium, and while I was enjoying it, when I got to the forest, it was clearly, we played Silent Hill 2, notice us Konami Senpai. And Konami Senpai did notice them. Like everything, the 2 remake was leaked early and people hated it. Again, because there was this idea that Silent Hill sucked post 3, many saw it as a shameless cash grab for the movie that ignores basic facts that Konami was shopping the series around. Once more, Hexadrive also produced a sample of their take on Silent Hill 2. So Konami was looking to see who they thought would work best. And also, video games are expensive. No one wants to make a bad game, especially one that will take years to make. The idea that this game would just be a shameless cash grab for the upcoming film makes zero sense. With how much development time and costs have exploded, there is no cheap cash grab for any AAA titles. There was also skepticism because Blooper had some misses like the Blair Witch, and no one's gonna bat 1,000, you're gonna get your swings and a miss. Blair Witch is one of those properties that seems interesting, but no one's been able to do really anything with it. Good news was on the horizon. After all, former Team Silent staff actually came back to make sure the game was a success, and that includes Akira Yamaoka and Masahiro Ito. Funny enough, they clashed with Blooper, but not for the reasons you think. The remake makes some changes, and the former team actually pushed for more changes. Blooper was hesitant to deviate too much from the source, which is understandable. It's 20 years later, and people are still under the assumption that Konami forced Team Silent at gunpoint to churn out the room against their will. If Blooper made too many changes, can you imagine the outrage that would be directed at them instead of Yamaoka and Ito? So yeah, Blooper was smart to try to retain as much as they could. That said, they did make some changes, more than quality of life stuff, but storyline stuff that does enough to pay homage to the original while being its own thing. One of the big things is you'll get visions of the past. Going to locations that are no longer needed in this iteration of the game will cause the player to see flashbacks of what once was. The general layout of the town is the same, however there are some diversions from the original game to keep people on their toes. Hence those visions of the past you might see if you're like me and religiously know the game. There's also a new level of interactability by breaking windows, and you better believe I trolled the streets of Silent Hill breaking almost every car window in sight for more ammo or health items. And it's just fun to break windows, honestly. I'm just imagining insurance rates skyrocketing after the havoc James is causing. The team also did a great job of strengthening a theme of the original in that James doesn't value his life. We see that here. The first monster encounter, he sees something strange and decides to go ahead and follow it, crawling under a jagged garage without 1 ounce of thought towards his own personal safety. Even the syringes. Look at this. Look at this disgusting, grime-ridden needle. James thinks it's great to just inject this right into his veins. Jesus, dude, I think I got secondhand tetanus from just looking at that thing up close. The most radical changes have been towards the combat, and as I stated earlier about not being overpowered but still being decent, I feel the 2 remake finally gets what they were reaching for all these years. We finally got it, guys. Every Silent Hill since The Room has been doing their best to have decent combat, and I feel like it's finally right with the 2 remake. The thing about combat here is that you can fight and combat is fun, but James isn't trained for fighting. There is a dedicated dodge button that you can use, but it's not perfect. If you do it too early, you're still going to take a hit. James isn't Batman. This is the biggest sticking point for some people. You either love the combat as a way to freshen up the series or feel that its inclusion detracts from the suspense. I'm of the mind that the combat is good, but there's simply a bit too much of it. Honestly, I feel like Blooper could have cut a good 20 to 30% of the enemies you encounter because there's just so many. And again, combat is adequate. This isn't Stranger of Paradise where I was looking forward to beating things. It is a bit of a catch-22 situation because the boss fights have been improved and are a highlight of the game. They no longer feel like they're just a slightly stronger enemy where you have to bust out your rifle. The fan favorite being Angela's abstract daddy, where you now fight in a quasi-chase scene, as it shows her home with a clearly drunk father with booze lying around, and you have to go into the closet. The same closet Angela hid in when she was younger with her teddy bear, hoping her father would not find her so that he could not beat her and, even worse, commit SA to her in the future. Again, much different from, well, simply bust out the rifle. Another great one is Eddie. It shows shades of the first Silent Hill, where when you go underground, your radio stops working, as a way to trick players in their familiarity with the game. Eddie now stalks you, and the fight is actually easier if you turn off your radio and flashlight. I love that the game doesn't spell things out, but lets players figure it out. So I did love the boss battles, and I can see why they wanted to keep players fresh, but still, around the prison, it starts to feel like overkill the amount of enemies you have to deal with. Plus, the game gives you plenty of health items. I think in one playthrough I had around 50 health items before going to the last boss. But I think I know why they did that, which I'll get to. That's my biggest issue, too much combat. My other complaints are minor and might just be me playing Silent Hill games way too much. The puzzles here do some new things, so you can't just rely on memory. But at this point, I've seen so many variations, I kind of pieced everything together rather easily. If that's the case, you're going to want to pump up that puzzle difficulty. This isn't a complaint, but just a notice why the original 2 should be playable, because of that free camera system. Now, Blooper did an excellent job with still creating an eerie and unnerving atmosphere without the use of a fixed camera angle. Like in the hospital, where once more physics just stopped being a thing, where a closed off building has a basement that has an expanse where it starts raining. So I feel like they did a commendable job of creating a new sense of eeriness, and it was me merely noticing things because I played the original so much. Like the entrance to the prison, I've remarked how the fixed angle and just going down messes with me visually. But you can't really do the same here. It's not a negative, just something I notice. I will though complain about the controller. I play this on my PS5 and I really do not like the PS5 controller or any game that uses sound from it, because I just cannot ever seem to find the right balance between the sound coming from the controller and the sounds from the TV. The Wii did it first, the Wii did it best. Here I found myself constantly adjusting to get an even tone. It doesn't help that the PS5 controller has a horrible battery life between charges. So if you're like me and that's an issue, a headset would actually work best, and many players prefer the game with the headset, which if you can, I would advise for it, because Yamaoka, as always, came out hot and heavy. I've praised them enough in this video, and it's no shocker that the GOAT came through. So yeah, my only real complaint is that there's a bit too much conflict and nitpicky stuff, because everything else is great and can even lead to debates like which is better, the new voice casts or the former. Konami decided, oh yeah, maybe it's best we let actors actually act and portray themselves. And everyone got it perfect, from James's dreary tone, Angela's nervous energy, even Eddie's maliciousness. It's fair to say everyone stands on their own. The game does a great job of expanding these characters. Like for instance, when you meet Eddie in the movie theater, this time you see his breath, showing that Eddie's world is different from the one you're inhabiting. He's not seeing things the same way you are. He's experiencing a different reality, that of that meat locker. This game truly feels like a love letter to the series from fans of the game. We see this in various callbacks and interactions, like those memories and photos from locations in the game. A notable interaction is when you approach Baldwin Manor. Maria remarks on it even though she's never been there. It's a location from the Born from a Wish side story, which people want as DLC. You know a game is good when people are like, please, I will pay you for more content. Blooper even added some new endings that reference the overall lore of Silent Hill that only mega nerds would get, which, hey, I'm one of them. In the Bliss ending, James takes this drug. Said drug was referenced in part 1 in Origins, the thing that Kaufman was behind. James takes it, and as soon as he plays the tape, he goes into the world inside the TV, deciding to live in a blissful denial. There's also the Sorrow ending, that's the expansion of the In Water ending, and the Alien ending, which is just the best. What happens here is you meet the PS2 era James model, who says the remake is a clone. It's dumb, goofy, and I love it. Now, about those photos I mentioned, Blooper confirmed that they're a puzzle, and it spells out you've been stuck here for 20 years. Many people have now fallen under the loop theory, which is a theory that says Silent Hill loops, and as mentioned before, we saw this in the first game where the player is likely to get a bad ending, so the game forces you to start over, as the items needed to get said good ending are not in the main path. This was reinforced in Downpour with the reversal ending, and the DJ in said game. You also literally loop in the short message. This has caused a divide, with some fans saying that the message is for James and others that the message is for the player, or maybe Konami. Literally every single game I mentioned post-room kept saying, "We're inspired by Silent Hill 2. Advocates of the theory state that in the game you find a note that says you've been through this so many times, and you see bodies that seem to resemble James. Even the one Eddie kills vaguely resembles James, while proponents would say having James in this limbo for 20 years is cruel. The same of both Angela and Laura. What did they do to get stuck in here for that amount of time? Also, in regards to character models, yeah, people reuse assets all the time, so they probably just reuse the models to save time and money. So what do I think of the validity of the theory? Like usual, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Firstly, we have to realize our perception of time is not the same as the characters in the game. It's like this. We've all heard the joke that Ash is every employer's dream. He's 10 years old, but 15 years of experience. This was to say that the Pokemon anime was going on for so long and Ash never aged. But someone did the math, because there's never really any mention of a long amount of time passing between the episodes. So each one has to be roughly a day, and some lead to night, with again no mention of a long break of time, so we can assume those night episodes are part of that same day cycle. And someone figured out that Ash had been roughly traveling for around a year or so. The same is true of Silent Hill. While time is funky because James mentions it suddenly becomes night out of nowhere, and we know the other world just follows its own rules, but there's never really talk of any characters you meet that you were away for an extended period of time. So I think we can roughly agree that each trip through the town can be anywhere from 5 to 8 hours, so a day's work, so that 20 years can actually be a few days. That would explain the town shifting and the deja vu, because it's trying to send a message to James. Even the other characters interact differently, showing this is a new trip through town. But I disagree with the endless theory that the town is just making James suffer because it contradicts the message of part 2. While suffering is a part of it, a central theme was how to move on when something traumatic happens. Eddie chooses to be a traumatizer in return. Angela cannot forgive herself and lets the trauma consume her. And finally, 3 things can happen to James. He could choose to ignore what he did and go with Maria, showing that the same turn of events will play out. And in the Bliss ending, we see once more that denial of what he did. He could also let his sins consume him and take his own life, or he can find the power to forgive himself and move on. So I think a loop does happen, but like in the first game, the loop exists to help Harry escape, just like the loop exists here for James to move on. That's why I think there's an abundance of health items, because a requirement for the good ending is not to stay at low health for an extended period of time. I have a friend who played it who's not very experienced in video games, and that's the first ending they got. I actually had to purposely try to get the other endings. Also, supposedly people looked into the data of the game and the good ending takes priority. I say supposedly because I can't read code. And lastly, a critical moment is that James refuses a drink. In the original, James remarks how he actually has a bit of a drinking problem and might be an alcoholic due to the stress of Mary's illness. But here he turns down a drink, so I feel like part 2 and the remake are in the same timeline, that James has been stuck here for a bit, but it hasn't been that 20 years, and the indicators that he has are more callbacks for the player than anything else, and that now he's finally able to escape. That's the great thing about Silent Hill. You can think about it long after you play it, it stays with you. So yes, the Silent Hill 2 remake is great, but it didn't save the series because the series never needs saving. There was a few bumps in the road, but I implore you, if you enjoyed Silent Hill 2 remake, give Origins, Shattered Memories, The Room, and Downpour a shot. That being said, the future is bright for Silent Hill. I can hardly wait for F, and yes, I will do a video, hopefully one not as long as this. I cannot wait for Townfall, and I am going to go ahead and see the movie. After all, I'm one of 10 people who saw the Gran Turismo movie, so there's that. Now if you need me, I'll be in that place you promised to take me to. Well, guys, gals, and those in between, that was a lot, truth be told. I didn't plan nor expect a project this big, but honestly, I had a lot of fun. Next, I'm gonna do Rogue Galaxy because I do need something of a palate cleanser. I have a few more large projects in the works, but I'm gonna sideline them like that Dot Hack one because this one took a lot out of me. But I hope you liked it. One update, I am no longer on Twitter. Besides it being a hellscape now, I was actually locked out months ago. I think what happened is I tried logging in with my VPN active because I always have my VPN when I'm on my phone. So I was locked out of my account, and whenever I tried contacting customer service, nothing happened. I'm on Blue Sky now, so if you want to see what I'm up to, you can catch me there. Well, guys, gals, and those in between, this was fun. See you next time. Stay blessed.